Good morning. I'm Amy Peterson, your new Associate Rector here, and I am so delighted to be here. I have already received such an incredible, hospitable, generous welcome, and I'm especially glad this morning to be able to open the scriptures with you for the first of many times. Would you pray with me? God, may only your words be spoken, and only your words heard. Amen. In today's gospel text, we find Jesus entering a certain village. Though Luke doesn't name this village, we know from the other gospels, and early readers of Luke would probably have known, that this village where Mary and Martha live is the village of Bethany. And learning about the village of Bethany this week has opened this story up for me in some really wonderful new kinds of ways. See, Bethany was a special spot for Jesus. He returns to it the way you might expect him to return to his own home. You probably know the story of how Jesus visited Mary and Martha after their brother Lazarus had died, and Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. But Bethany is also the place that Jesus was coming from when he entered into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. It's where he spent the week before the Passover. We can read in the Gospels about Jesus eating dinner at Simon the leper's house in Bethany. That's where he was when a woman came in and anointed him with expensive perfume. And when Jesus was ready to ascend to heaven after his resurrection, he walked toward the village of Bethany and ascended from right outside that place. So what was this place that was so special to Jesus? The place he wanted to spend holidays, the last place he wanted to see on earth before he ascended to heaven? The name Bethany, it probably means house of the poor or house of affliction. Now, my friend Bethany, who's actually here this morning, would like me to let you know that it could also be translated house of figs. And so if you're naming your baby Bethany and you need a little decorative name plate with the baby name meaning to hang in the room, you can go with house of figs. That's fine. But the scholarly consensus bends toward this interpretation, house of affliction or house of poverty. And scholars believe that Bethany was a village that was established as a place where the poor and the sick could find refuge and care. It was where lepers lived. It was a spot for folks who didn't fit into normal society. And it was also a spot for pilgrims, a last stop before they reached the holy city of Jerusalem after a long and possibly arduous journey from Galilee. So here's this village, far enough from the temple that it's okay for folks who were sick or ritually unclean to live there, a place of refuge for the poor and for pilgrims. And this is the place Jesus kept returning. Don't you just love this about Jesus? I mean, he had wealthy followers, he had rich friends, but when he wanted to feel at home, he didn't look for his friends who had a hot tub and a flat screen in the mountains. He went and stayed with his friends who lived among the sick and the unclean. So what does knowing this about Bethany help us to see about Martha and her interaction with Jesus in this text? The funny thing about Martha and Mary and Lazarus is that it seems that none of them are married, right? They're adult siblings living together, which was somewhat strange for this time and place. But even stranger, Lazarus doesn't seem to be the head of the sibling group. We hear from Mary and Martha at various points in the gospel, but Lazarus never speaks. The text even calls their house her house, Martha's house, not Lazarus's house. Which leaves me wondering. Normally the man would have been the head of the household, the one speaking for others. So perhaps something else is going on here. Perhaps Mary and Martha have made their home in Bethany because of Lazarus. Maybe he had some special needs. Maybe he had leprosy or Down syndrome or a degenerative disease or an accident in his youth left him in need of a little more care. Maybe it was their brother's illness that led Mary and Martha to give up what ideas they might have had about what their own normal adult lives would have been so that they could care for their brother in Bethany. Sometimes our vocations are born out of our wounds. And I have to wonder if Martha's vocation was bound up with her brother's struggle in some way. I imagine she's running a hospice or a guest house, and the word in Greek that's used to describe her service is the same word we get our word deacon from. So like a deacon, Martha is caring for the poor and the sick. She's running the whole operation. People are depending on her. So when Jesus and his followers all show up for a visit without even texting beforehand to let her know they were on the way, Martha welcomes them in. And then a little later, she comes downstairs and she's overwhelmed and she says, "Jesus, I'm overwhelmed." Martha's work is good and holy and important, and she knows that. And she's stressed that she won't be able to take care of everyone, to meet all of the very real needs around her. Jesus' words to this woman aren't a condemnation of her work. They're an invitation. Martha, you are worried and distracted. Only one thing is needed. We know that Martha's work matters, and we know this in part because Luke has placed this story in his gospel right after the story of the Good Samaritan, which we heard last Sunday. So Luke has just shown us that being a good neighbor, looking out for the wounded, that's what we're all called to do. This work Martha's doing, we're all called to be doing it. But perhaps Luke puts this story right after that one to remind us that we can do this work without being stressed and anxious about getting it right all the time. Because the ultimate outcome doesn't depend on us. It depends on God. Putting these two stories together, we find an invitation to practice faithful neighbor love like the Good Samaritan and like Martha, and we find freedom from needing to successfully save every wounded soul who comes across our path. Freedom to sit at Jesus' feet, knowing that he is the one who saves. Incidentally, for a woman to sit at the feet of Jesus, learning, was unusual. Normally, that kind of space would have been segregated by sex, like the end of a dinner party in the 1950s when the men retired to the study for a cigar. But Mary stays with the men. She stays as a student of Jesus. And in the Middle East in the first century, you only sat at the feet of a rabbi if you were preparing to be a teacher yourself. You were learning so that you could teach. Jesus radically affirms Mary's place there at his feet. As I think about my vocation here at Trinity, I look forward to doing both of these things with you, to serving our community faithfully, like Martha, to sitting at Jesus' feet, learning from him together, like Mary. Because I believe the church can be a place like Bethany, where Jesus felt most at home, a place where the wounded gather and we care for each other's wounds. A place where we believe in chosen and unconventional family like the adult siblings Jesus traveled to visit as if they were his parents at Christmas time. A place where social hierarchies are turned upside down and every person is invited both to serve and to learn. Church may be the only place where we can work for the healing of the broken world without being weighed down by anxiety about doing it right or fixing everything. Because Jesus has already accomplished our salvation, and Jesus is making all things new. Thanks be to God.